we will get started then. Um, Hello, everybody. I'm Claudia. I am uoapasu's External Outreach Coordinator, and it's so nice to see so many of your faces, old and new. Yeah, we're super excited. This is our last event for our APAM speaker series, and as you may or may not know, today we are hosting Chella, and it's super exciting. So happy to see you all. And yeah, before we get started, I'm just going to read a short biography of Chella. And as you can see, we have our interpreters here, and there is an option to do live captioning below if you so choose to use that. So yeah, we're just going to get started. Um, Renowned for his personal documentation of his experience in gender transition, Chella is celebrated for his motto, "Be your own representation." As a deaf, genderqueer, Chinese, and Jewish individual, Chella found he didn't have role models to look up to, and so he became a voice and a true representation for himself and for others. With over 290,000 subscribers and many millions of views on his YouTube video entitled "1 Year on Testosterone Voice Updates," Chella is normalizing the conversation around gender issues for disabled and LGBTQ+ youth. Through his talks, Chella opens up about his experiences transitioning on testosterone, navigating the world with a disability, and facing isolation while growing up within a small and conservative town in central Pennsylvania. His TED Talk, Becoming Him, offers an empowering investigation of gender, identity, race, and disability. Since leaving high school as a junior to attend college early, Chella has written for Condé Nast's first queer publication, Them, launching a radically inclusive clothing line in collaboration with Open Ceremony, signed as the first deaf and trans masculine model with IMG Models, and was cast as a superhero within Warner Brothers' DC Universe Titans. He hopes to continue pushing the boundaries of what it means to be accessible, inclusive, and equal in this world. So please give it up for Chella. But yes, so nice to meet you, Chella. I'd love if you could also just introduce yourself and maybe give us some information that we haven't heard from the bio already.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me and saying like my whole life story. That was impressive. I'm trying to think like what I can add that wasn't already said. I feel like I'm 22 and right now I'm in my girlfriend's grandma house. And let's see, what else? I actually had to answer a quirky fact in an interview the other day, and what I came up with was that I carry packets of sugar with me all the time. And I feel like that's definitely something that a lot of people don't know about me. But other than that, I feel like you all pretty much know me really well by now after that.
Super cool. Well, thank you for coming in today. It's such an honor to have you speak to us about Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. As we're closing out this month of May, we think it's just really important to have people come in who can really talk about representation, which we all know you're really about. But yeah. So how this is going to work is, since our event runs from 6 to 8, we're just going to start our moderated Q&A panel. We just hope that you can listen in. It helps if you're available and you can show your faces and turn on your videos. It kind of just helps the energy. So feel free to do that. And if not, then just hang tight until our free-for-all Q&A, where you can even ask Chella himself some questions about anything. So yeah, let's just get started. I think just to start, since this month is really focused on Asian Pacific American identity and empowerment, we're curious about what were some struggles you faced growing up as someone who is both Asian and some part of the LGBTQ community.
Oh, I think there's actually a lot more intersections than people think. With any marginalized identity, you just face discrimination. And that's just this common loophole through everything. And at the time, when I was facing racism where I grew up in my small town, I actually recently spoke about this. It wasn't the kind of racism that was violent, like physically violent. And for that reason, it was hard for me at the time to identify it as racism because I didn't understand that it could be on this continuum and people saying like, people always categorizing me as like their Asian best friend or commenting on my eyes. And I recently was thinking about how people would always fetishize my skin color and tell me how beautiful it was, but then like crack an Asian joke or something's terribly racist. And just looking back, loopholes is being able to identify the discrimination I was facing because it was not talked about. And now I can see things so clearly, which makes me realize how common it is, unfortunately.
Yeah, totally agree. I think a lot of us can agree that we've faced similar experiences, some maybe more mild and some maybe more aggressive, which is, always an issue. And we're just glad to know that you were able to kind of power through that. And I think with us, with so many multiracial students as well as API students overall, often feeling even maybe not Asian enough, do you have any advice on overcoming those feelings and maybe even sharing some experiences on how you kind of overcame those kinds of discrimination or racism at that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So it's all stemming from stereotypes, like this ideology of the Asian that we should be. And it also comes back to representation. Usually only stereotypes are represented, often created by white people or people outside of the Asian experience who don't even understand what it means to be Asian. So whenever I feel that I'm not Asian enough, I remind myself that I'm just comparing myself to this fantastical stereotype that literally does not exist. And there's a whole continuum of us, and we all have different individualized experiences, and no one should ever invalidate that for you.
Yeah, most definitely. And I guess since so many of us are students, are there any, I guess, like advice you can give to students now who may kind of be, I guess, like not used to speaking out against that and might want to tap into that a bit more about like how we can maybe use our resources available to us and kind of just start?
Absolutely. So I think you first and foremost have to be ready. Don't ever push yourself to speak out if you feel like you are being forced to. It's your job. It's not your job. It is not your job to do that. And what I would do when I was a lot younger is use social media as a tool, honestly. I would follow a lot of different people. I would diversify my feed because my life lacked so much diversity in central Pennsylvania. I just physically could not reach people that I wanted to be around, whether that be like queer people or disabled people or BIPOC people. There was just this scarcity, and there wasn't when I was online. And so I'd say definitely make sure, like maybe go through who you're following and try to follow positive, individuals who speak out about it. And that will definitely get your gears turning about what's possible to do. And it's also just a different form of activism in general. You don't always have to show up in the streets. You can, and that's pretty cool. But at the same time, you can also like make a post and like state your thoughts or be introverted and also an activist. And again, a whole continuum of ways you can be an activist.
And I love how you kind of mentioned that you don't have to necessarily be out in the streets just because maybe that's not accessible for everybody. And you can do just as much activism and speaking out at home. And I think a lot of us are kind of trying to balance that as well, obviously, in these times of COVID.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely.
Mhm. But yeah, and I also like how you mentioned how there's also resources at school as well, kind of like being able to reach out to these communities. I think at the University of Oregon, it's great that one, we have APASU, which is kind of an umbrella group for all Asian Pacific Americans, and also the LGBTQA alliance that is available, and also the deaf community that our interpreters are also representing. So that's super cool. I also encourage everybody to kind of just reach out to those resources and find your community. But yeah. And I also was curious, in terms of older generations who may or may not relate to younger generations about really owning your identity, especially being a person of color out here in a white America, or being a part of the LGBTQIA plus community. I guess like how do you kind of have these conversations with people who just like aren't on that same level of understanding with you and just start on destigmatizing these whole conversations?
Good question. You need patience first and foremost, and you also need to acknowledge that they didn't have the same resources that we have now. And so when you're speaking with them, you have to use language that's accessible, which oftentimes is like just the foundation of queer, disabled, or BIPOC culture. And it's really just going into the conversations not expecting them to already know everything, because we all at one point or another didn't know anything, you know. And I think when you dive deep into the activism community and your identities, you tend to forget that you were also once at a point where you didn't know anything, and there's no shame in that, and there's no shame in asking. So it's definitely just reminding yourself that we all started somewhere and to have patience for that.
For sure. And kind of bouncing back to also you using social media as a tool to kind of start these conversations and spark inspiration about it. I guess like when did you start getting into that, and like how would you see your impact and growth from your lens of now compared to when you started?
And I think when I started, I was probably like a freshman in high school, maybe like 14. And I was still very adamant. I've just always been very determined to let people know when there's injustices. So if you go back like on the bot, don't do it. But if you were to go back to like the end of my Instagram, there are posts about my high school, like um all the girl at the time I identified as like a cisgender girl, mainly because that's all I knew by default. But all the girls, including me, at PE had to learn like self-defense if there was like a masculine person gonna come and sexually assault us or something. And while we were doing that, all the boys were like outside playing football. And so there was a series of posts I made being angry about that. And in addition, like I would get dress coded all the time, not because I wore very revealing clothing, not that it matters if I did, but I just would wear like sometimes my shoulders would be showing. And of course, if you're a femme individual, you know how it is. So I would be like called out of my AP classes during like speeches to get yelled at for like showing my shoulders. And so there was a moment in high school where I just went off and I started this whole petition about changing the dress code, and it got like thousands of signatures because my school was huge. It was like a mini college. And I've just always been so invested that way. It's never just like, I don't remember exactly when it started, but I just have always been so adamant about speaking out when things are fucked up. Can I say that? Yeah. So, you know, that happened. And from there, I don't know, I think it just like gains traction, especially as I started medically transitioning. We're in a time where people are more curious than ever, and things are becoming safer to share. So I'm very privileged to be able to share my journey, you know, now. And it's just been a domino effect from there.
I love that. And I love that, you can really start at any age, kind of just taking action and also impacting others within your community to take action. And I think that's just such a powerful thing. And I think a lot of people who might follow your work can see that over time. Obviously, you've evolved from social media to doing even more work within, pop culture media today, whether or not that comes to modeling, acting, directing. And I guess like how have you kind of navigated just continuing to represent yourself and finding also representation of yourself in other communities as you like find new direction in your career?
Well, representing yourself never really has a beginning or an end. You know, it's just all the time, perpetual. Whereas finding community, you know, for a long time, I really thought that I had to find my community in one place. And that was really hurting me, that ideology. And I definitely adapted it to find my community in many different places. Like, I can't, it's very rare for me to find someone who is Jewish, deaf, Asian, Chinese. Like, I would exhaust myself searching the world for someone like that. But I've been able to find fulfillment and community and love and connection in like the queer community, and then like the disabled community, and just the BIPOC community. But it's also like sometimes there's intersections and people who overlap, but it's definitely rare. And just because they are like you on paper doesn't mean you'll actually connect when you meet them in person. But definitely expanding that ideology that your community has to be in one place and all your needs can be met in that one place. It's harmful to believe that.
And in terms of intersectionality as well, I think a lot of people here can identify being in more than just one community. And I guess, is it like, have you ever found it to be like difficult to kind of identify yourself in all of these communities or just in more than one? And if so, how do you kind of navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, intersectionality wasn't a word that I knew until later on in life. And it really is just words, like our world, especially like Western society, just loves to slap labels on you and categorize you. But for much of my life, I wasn't deaf, trans, Asian. I was just Chella, or, at the time, my birth name, but I was just me, and there's a hard balance with labels and definitions. To a point, it's incredible, right? Because you can meet people, you can make connections, you can use hashtags, you can find your community. But there's also this point where people start to gatekeep those definitions and then people start to exclude you. And so you have to find a healthy balance between when are labels important and when are they not. And knowing that has absolutely helped me navigate what we call intersectionality.
Most definitely. And that kind of reminds me, I think, of this whole debate also that surrounds, labeling Asian Americans as like so many different things, including AAPI or ADPI or just APA. Like, I
Yeah.
guess, do you have any thoughts about that as well, since you are also part of, if you identify with the Asian Pacific American community? But yeah, do you have any thoughts about that and like how we can kind of maybe like not take labels so seriously?
Yeah, I mean, I just always remind myself, even with any definition, it's so subjective. Everyone, even though there's like, you can look up the definition, there are so many definitions. There's like political definitions, social definitions, and people just, you really, when you're talking about something, you really just have to ask the person you're conversing with what their understanding of that thing that you're talking about with. Because I've found that on so many levels, like you're debating something and then you're actually on like completely different pages about what that really meant. So I love just really being upfront and asking people, like, how would you yourself define that? So we're on the same page first and foremost. But yes.
For sure. And have you always kind of been comfortable with having those like really upfront conversations? Because obviously, with people with different personalities, it's kind of hard to start those conversations. But I guess, like, did you kind of ease into that? Like, how did you kind of start growing into that?
I have always been very honest and felt most comfortable that way, but I definitely moved away from that as I hit puberty and as I felt like I had to conform into being a girl for like my own safety and just because that was the only route I thought was possible. So I from the beginning, I have always just been very authentic and honest and blunt. But there was a period of my life where I feel like was missing, was gone, that I lost all that. And I wasn't myself. And I was just playing this role of this girl that I thought I was supposed to be. But since then, I have come back to my core of who I knew I was and never, ever want to go back to that performance. And so I'm so comfortable. I mean, no, not always comfortable. For the most part, I prioritize having honest discussions. Sometimes they're super uncomfortable, and sometimes that's awesome though. So I kind of like being comfortable. So, like those are the kinds of conversations that are the most interesting and engaging. So I definitely center that honesty now, but it doesn't make it any less hard sometimes. It's still hard.
Yeah, and I think it's such a great thing that you mentioned being authentic and genuine to yourself as well. And that kind of brings me to my next point, I guess. And you also mentioned, sorry, I'm kind of like bouncing all over the place, but you
Oh,
mentioned like,
you can.
yeah, thank you. But yeah, you mentioned before that like you used to feel like you were kind of missing something or just like that void or something. And obviously now that that's more filled, and I was just wondering, like, are there any more like questions, I guess, that exist in your mind today about things that you kind of want to be filled, like anything that you want to be answered in terms of like your identity or just like the work that you do? I guess it's like that's kind of like a very like thoughtful question.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good question. It's a good question. I just let me think for a second. Yeah, I mean, I feel like a lot of you guys here are probably around the same age as me, and it's just like I don't know what I want to do for the rest of my life, you know, and still figuring things out. And that's the big question, right? Like what do you want to do to your life? I don't know. So we'll just see where things go. But that's definitely an unknown for me still.
Yeah, most definitely. I know a lot of people here are, yeah, for sure thinking about those questions as well. And knowing that you kind of just like jumped into this like really bountiful career of doing so many different things, like coming out of college, I guess, like, could you, I guess, explain a little bit about how you kind of navigated like leaving college and going into that? Since I think a lot of us, if not close to graduation, are nearing it and are maybe like also thinking about what can we do as well.
Right. I mean, it's really, you know, everyone has their own journey. But for me, when I was in second year of college, I was studying virtual reality programming at Parsons. And clearly that's not really what I'm doing now. So it was hard for me because actually at Parsons, the virtual reality program is not actually that accessible. There was a lot of hearing required, and they hadn't had any deaf or hard of hearing individual be a part of the program before. So I was getting so burnt out by the homework and the work and just trying to keep up with all my other non-disabled classmates. And it was also this time that I was just in the middle of my transition. And I just felt this like deep desire that I needed to document this and I needed to put all of my thoughts down on paper. So I decided to take a semester off to write that book and really just sit with where I was in life because there was so much happening so quickly and I needed to reflect. So that's what compelled me to take a semester off and leave that. But I mean, really, I would urge you all just to follow your intuition because I don't know how it works, but it's important, you know, to follow your intuition.
Yeah, I think intuition is such a big word too. And I love that you mentioned that. I think a lot of us maybe tend to not trust our intuition and just like really second guess ourselves. And I think that there is a lot that can be said about putting trust in your own convictions and like your own emotions at that. And it seems like that was like such a big part of you kind of like navigating as well about in terms of like activism and speaking out. And now that you mention it, I guess, and like you having to kind of survive in that community in education where you kind of had to keep up with hearing individuals. And like we do also have a deaf community at our university. It's like, how can you, I guess, like, how do you advise people who are set back in certain ways, whether or not it comes to hearing or just other senses? Like, how do you kind of encourage people to do their best to keep up or maybe just act, like find ways to keep up?
Yeah. I think that if they're around my age, they probably have their own whole script of how to advocate for themselves. I mean, disabled people, or I'm thinking about disability, but people who have some obstacle usually have so many coping mechanisms. For me, I'm very, again, adamant about advocating for myself. So when I don't understand something, I speak up and I let people know and I let them know how they can accommodate and the options that way. I There are so many ways. I mean, it really depends on the situation as well, to be honest. But my overall value is to remind myself that my disabilities never makes me less than, and to teach other people that as well, because it's definitely not taught, especially disability in mass media. It's very submissive and condescending, and that's not it. Disabled people are some of the most resilient, incredible people I've ever met in my life, and I want people to know that.
Yeah, I think that was very beautifully put. I definitely love that you mentioned someone's experience and identity is something that should never be used against them or just like looked down upon. I think that makes also someone just so strong and beautiful in their own way. And I kind of want to take that opportunity to segue into a video or a short film that you produce, which kind of really
Oh, yeah.
talks about the beauty of being deaf. And hopefully then after, we can get a little bit into about the creation of that and your inspiration for that. But yeah, I'm just going to share a short film with everybody. I hope you enjoy it. For the hearing individuals, it is silent. Don't like be alarmed or anything at that. But yes. But yeah, that was directed, produced by Chella. And yes, feel free to use the reactions, obviously, whenever throughout the stream. But yeah, I just loved that. And I think it was incredibly powerful. And I'm just curious about what was your inspiration for that, like, and like your creative process going into that.
Thank you. It was a dream I had ever since I was in middle school. I felt very isolated when I was growing up as a disabled individual. There was no one around me that was deaf. I had no deaf representation, and I couldn't even find any online actually. So I would just sign with my family sometimes as my mode of communication. And I just thought, like, how can we make this beautiful? How can I show people how beautiful this is without them having to understand us, you know? And my first thought was, what if we were underwater? Like, how beautiful is it that we can sign underwater? So, like, growing up, for a while, I just imagined all these deaf people underwater signing and like showing people how beautiful our language is and the culture within our language. And so it was just a dream, literally like just a dream come true to carry out. And I casted some close friends who killed it and were so beautiful in their own ways. And yeah, I mean, it was just this project really close to my heart.
And I think it's such a great thing that you're also able to connect and work with people who also identify in your community as well and can really contribute to such great creative projects. And I guess, how can we, I feel like you kind of touch upon this, but especially like in your life right now, like how are you constantly looking for more and more people to connect with and like, share a common bond with during these times?
There are so many people in the world, and I just often think about how much there is to learn from every single one. I mean, it sounds cheesy, but I honestly don't believe anything's cheesy if you truly mean it. And I read something when I was a kid. I think it was like elementary school. It was just like probably some quote on Tumblr that like every person you meet, you have something to learn from them. But it really just stuck in my head, and I genuinely try to figure out with each person that I meet, like what's that thing? What's that nugget of interesting information that they know that I don't know? And it makes life a lot more interesting. So approaching life and situations that way with curiosity can definitely just make your whole experience a lot richer. And you can absolutely find more common ground that way, and therefore collaborations.
And has communicating and just networking and collaborating been impacted with COVID? Like, how has that changed for you, I guess?
There's been a lot of Zoom meetings, as you all must know. I can't imagine going to college in a pandemic, but it's definitely just been a lot more online and secluded.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can agree with that. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of like meetings for you as well, like, have you ever felt that? I think a lot of us, call it Zoom fatigue, like burnout, anything like that. Have you felt that at all during this time?
Absolutely. Yeah. It definitely like just, I've made sure I leave the house and get some natural sunlight on some days, especially when I have a lot of meetings. So every morning I typically wake up and work out. And when I was doing Zoom meetings, I would try to do that outside as much as possible because I knew I'd be stuck inside all day.
Yeah, for sure. And now that like, everything is slowly starting to come back to normal and you're starting to see, like vaccines and, people becoming a lot more responsible and safe, like is there anything you're really looking forward to maybe in terms of like creative projects that you've been like waiting on or just like collaborations once we're back in person and you're able to do those things safely?
Yeah, there's a few projects I'm working on now that I never really thought I would do. I'm excited about those. I can't say anything about them yet, but there are more collaborations coming soon. And yeah, there's just a lot of joy in collaborations because it's like so much creativity in one room. It's just so inspiring. And I love being around that. I think that's why I also love New York City so much. But yeah, there's definitely a lot coming up, which will be easier to do once the corona passes.
Yeah, for sure. And being in New York City must be such like a vibrant, like inspiring thing. And I think like surrounding yourself also with, people and an environment that you feel really great in is such like a powerful thing. But yeah, I guess when starting a new project, like how do you kind of find those inspirations? Like do they naturally come to you? Do you have a process? Like any hobbies that help with that?
There's so much inspiration. I feel like there's so much that I want to do all the time. I've never felt a lack of inspiration. If anything, I felt a lack of inspiration for a specific medium, but then I just realized, oh, it's not that I'm burned out, but it's that I'm more curious about exploring this, like film instead of painting right now, or something like that. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's inspiration everywhere. Like whether you're like walking down the street and you see, and sometimes I just like stop and I see something and I'm like, oh, that's a good composition, and I take a photo of it. Or whether you're talking with someone and they like say something that in passing, but it resonates with you. Like there's just so many like pockets of things to create, and I just feel like inspired all the time, which is overwhelming but exciting.
Yeah. I mean, overwhelming inspiration is such a like a cool way to put it. It's so great to be, like be taking in so many inputs and senses and to be inspired in that sense. But yeah, and the way you mentioned composition reminds me, about art and correct me if I'm wrong, but you kind of like started with art before moving on to like these so like other different creative directions and paths. But like I guess how has art kind of been by your side like all these years? Like how have you kind of like let it stick with you and like channel your energy into it?
Yeah, I can't even remember not being an artist in the way that I just like to create things out of nothing. Whether that was like when I was a kid, I would always go around my house with like a big trash bag, and I'd like ask my parents like, "Do you have any junk you don't want?" Or my sister, and by the end of the day, I have like all this random all these random things. And I don't know if you know Calvin and Hobbes, but I was obsessed with their comics when I was a kid. And Calvin and Hobbes, like they always build like, time machines and robots and like cloning machines out of nothing. And I felt very inspired by that when I was a kid. So I'd create time machines out of like cardboard, and um, to this day, I still love like dumpster diving for stuff. You can find some cool stuff, especially like people in New York throw out like the coolest things. And I love taking those things and just transforming them. But yeah, anyway, I'm getting back to the point. I can't remember not being an artist.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd be so curious as to what you can create in Eugene, Oregon. Dumpster diving and on the street. We typically just have used furniture. But no, yeah,
No, that's the good stuff. I've like my dad strongly dislikes when I go dumpster diving because I'll shove like doors and like broken windows into the car, and he's like a car dude, and it'll scratch that up. But yeah, like paint anything can be your canvas. So I've done a lot of door paintings, which is fun.
that's super cool. Yeah. I mean, and also like as you're kind of moving on to these different directions as well, and you're keeping art by your side, but you're also doing these things such as modeling and acting and stuff. Like how are you kind of prioritizing, like what you're doing and like what medium you're like most working with, I guess, through all of it?
I think it goes back to what we were saying before, intuition. What are you compelled towards at that moment in time? And that's what I prioritize. Um, I do like being busy, so I'm often balancing a lot, which I personally enjoy. It's not for some people, but I don't know. I think also just growing up in central Pennsylvania, there was this lack of opportunity anywhere. Like I would hang out at Target, and that would be like the club in central Pennsylvania. And it was just so boring. So now to be around all these opportunities, I don't want to say no. I just want to try everything. So I prioritize a lot, but it typically ends up being pretty cool.
Super cool. Yeah. And then since you're, again, involved in so much and, you mentioned in Pennsylvania, you didn't really get to see a lot of opportunity, but now you're kind of like surrounded by that and you're kind of like diving into so many different things. Have you ever felt imposter syndrome? Because I feel like a lot of people here can agree that like trying new things and doing those things that you've been wanting to do, you feel that really greatly because it's just a part of like self-criticism. But yeah, I'm just curious about your experience with that and how you kind of push that to the side and get over it.
Yeah, I feel all the time. I mean, it's so weird. Like when I gave my TED talk, I was terrified of giving public talks. Like I was shaking in my boots. Like I don't know, but you just got to do it. You have to wing it. And with acting, that was never um, on my agenda and really came out of the blue. Even during the audition, I more so did it out of curiosity and never actually expected to get the part. Um, so there was a bunch of imposter syndrome. But then, it's just reminding yourself again, like with activism, everyone starts somewhere. And just because you don't have like an academic background in it, or you're not a certain age, or you don't look a certain way, it doesn't mean anything. Like anyone can do anything, literally. And there's no limitations or boundaries. It's all in your head.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's, really strong for a lot of people to hear, because I think growing up in, a traditional setting of, going to college and maybe being expected to go into like a 9 to 5 or something, that we don't really think that we could go into media currently in such a big way, and maybe even like at the level you're at. And, you mentioned like, everybody kind of starts somewhere. So do you have any, tips or advice for people who maybe like might be interested in joining media in that sort of way? Like how can they really get started and find those people?
Yeah, I think it's finding people who are also in the same boat as you, who are curious as well, and then just starting to create things with them. Like that's what I did in high school. And that's how I found some of my closest friends. And also in college, like we didn't know anyone, but we had each other and we would just create our own content. And that was so like fulfilling. And eventually people just wanted to see more, and it was like a snowball effect. But I would say like try to don't think about things generally. You'll overwhelm yourself. Think about like it moment to moment. What can you do right now? What people can you work with? Who can you surround yourself with? What ideas do you have and how can you take a step towards them now? And if you just always think about things that way, you'll just keep making those steps and get closer and closer to what you actually want to do.
Yeah, and I think that's so interesting as well, because you one mentioned following that intuition and kind of just like just following that intuition, but you also mentioned kind of having that plan to be able to go on to the next step. And I guess like how do you kind of balance both having that intuition, which kind of takes you spontaneously to a different direction, and also just having a plan for different directions as well?
It's moment to moment, really. It's just like accepting that your plans will inevitably change, and that's something really hard to accept, but it's really just like reassessing where you are at that moment in time with every single day and letting things change depending on your needs at that moment.
Sure. No, yeah. And I think that's really great too. Kind of judging it either by case by case, scenario, kind of like case by case basis, and things like that. But I think that's really cool that you're kind of able to adapt to different situations and according to like, how you're feeling in the moment, kind of like what you want in the moment. And I feel like that's also carried you really far in your career going into these different paths. And I'd like to tap more into like specific paths that you're kind of walking right now, which includes acting. I know that is more of like a recent thing, and you even mentioned that's not something you really predicted was going to happen. So I'm so curious about like how that kind of jump started for you, and like how like where you're at right now with that, because as mentioned in your bio, you're playing a really exciting character in DC Titans. I'd love for you to just kind of go into that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was very unanticipated. I have a friend who is a deaf actress, and she, out of the blue, sent me a casting call one day that she's seen, and it was from Warner Brothers saying like, we're looking for a half Latinx or half Asian actor who is either deaf or hard of hearing or knows how to sign. And I read that and I was just like, there's no way, like, I can't not do this. This is so niche. This has never happened before. So I felt like, I was like, okay, let me try. And so I read the script and everything. I didn't know what I was doing, but I went in, and I mean, the rest is history. It was for this character whose name is Jericho on this show called Titans by DC Universe, which was a dream come true because I love superheroes. I grew up watching so many superhero movies with my dad. And I don't know if you know It Man, but that's like a big, I feel like Asians, like not superhero, but like really cool action movie. And I would just like watch that with my dad and my grandpa growing up as well. So I just, I don't know, it was just a dream come true. And what I realized though, looking back, is I have not had any formal acting training, but I do feel like I've been playing this character, which is the girl that I felt like I was supposed to be for 18 years of my life. So I think I actually had a lot of acting experience, nothing I can really put on my resume, but all trans individuals who have to repress who they are know what it's like to act.
Right, right. And, I think that's such a great thing that one, it's you mentioned like it being niche, not that happening like very often. And I'm like, I think a lot of us are so glad that you're able to take that opportunity because, we're able to find like representation in the actual actor itself on screen. And I mean, like, how, I guess, being in that position to really represent yourself and actually represent your character accurately, how does that kind of make you view media currently? Obviously, there is a lot of actors and actresses who don't exactly really represent their character to the fullest, but do you feel like actors should strictly be able to do that, or is there a line?
For representing their character authentically.
Yeah, so like when it comes to like what's really common is for Asian characters and like really specific ethnic characters, say like they are Chinese, like people who maybe aren't Chinese and also like aren't Asian and like and they kind of just pass as it, are cast just because it's like they benefit more within media in our country. So it's like, how do you kind of feel about that today, and like do you think that's improving at all and getting
Yeah.
better, or?
Well, in terms of the last like 5 years, even, it's definitely improving, but we still have a lot of work to do. Ideally, in a perfect world, I would love to see people authentically cast. I was actually just talking to um, a close friend of mine who's also in the industry about this, and it's really, ideally, I would want authentic people cast in these roles, but I'm also working to acknowledge the steps that are being taken, even if they aren't authentic. For example, my queer friend was telling me about like Brokeback Mountain and how that wasn't authentically cast, but as a queer person, it changed their life because it was the only representation that they had at that time. So I think it's acknowledging the baby steps that we have to take, but like always continuously pushing the boundary because we can always do better, always. And that can always be more authentic. And what I learned on Titans is that by bringing an authentic person into play this fictional part, they can actually change a lot behind the camera that people don't even know about, that ends up making that role more authentic when it's actually on screen.
Yeah, and I think that's such a valuable thing as well. Not only just having that really specific education for acting, because not everybody's really has access to that, but also just like one's experiences and one's life is also count as like experience and an education in itself. And I guess like, do you feel like there's still? I mean, you mentioned there's a lot of work to be done, but like, how can the industry itself work on educating itself on portraying authenticity through their characters and shows?
There is always like someone out there, I feel like, that is perfect for the role. And I think it's really doing the work to find someone. It's definitely hard if that character has a lot more intersections, but you know, work harder as casting directors and also like really take their stories and their culture into consideration. If you just amplify their story without any respect for the individuals in that community or their culture, then that is not fair at all. That's very harmful and very, very, very painful. And it's important people realize that who have power in Hollywood.
For sure. And I think the thing you mentioned also, like people being in power, like using that responsibility, using that power to be responsible and really champion voices of more silenced communities is such a big thing. But yeah, no, thank you for sharing. I loved all of that. And yeah, I feel like that is kind of a good place to kind of take a break for everybody. But yeah, we're just going to go into a 15-minute intermission, and we will see everybody at 7:10. We're just going to take this time to take a break and just get ready for our next Q&A. So yeah, take this time to think about the questions you want to ask Chella, and just like how you kind of want to use that time to get to know everyone. So yeah, thank you. All right.
Cool. Be back
everybody. Welcome back. It is now 7:10, and we're going to be concluding our intermission. So feel free to join back in. Again, if you would like to and you are available, we all think it's super nice when you turn your videos on so you're just able to see faces. Oh my God, Calissa, I never noticed that. But yeah, welcome back, everybody. We'll just give a minute just so everybody is situated, and then we'll continue. Yes. Again, just to let you all know, this is now our free-for-all Q&A portion, which means that you have the opportunity to ask Chella any questions that you've been curious about for hearing and speaking individuals, and just actually everybody in general. Please feel free to input your questions into the live chat. If you'd like to anonymously ask a question and have me read it instead, feel free to private message me those questions. Other than that, we will be picking and choosing who gets to ask Chella and give them their time. But yes, if you are hearing and speaking, you can feel free to unmute yourself when you're called upon to ask. And if you are hard of hearing and you sign, you will also be able and given the floor to sign as well. And that way, everybody can kind of just have their own time and to interact. But yes, feel free to start whenever. And yeah, we'll just give a minute for people to start asking some questions.
That background is so funny. I just noticed it. Oh my God, thank you. I love it.
Calissa coming through with the graphics.
I don't even know how to change my background. I feel like a grandpa.
You can also do filters now, so there's
On
that.
Zoom?
Yeah, on Zoom
Really?
filters. Yeah, anybody want to give a Zoom lesson while we wait for questions?
I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, while those are trickling in, I am getting some privately, so we can start with those. So I'm just going to be asking them, and these were anonymously sent. Oh, there we go. See, you figured it out. Looking great.
Thank you.
Okay, so well, for our first question for the free-for-all Q&A, everybody feel free to jam out if you'd like, but what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned coming out of college and going into the professional adult world? As Asian Americans, does that complicate matters more in your experience?
I feel like I'm still continuously transitioning into the professional adult world. I feel like you can't take me seriously saying this now. But in the profession, this is what it looks like in the professional adult world. But so some lessons that I've learned is to trust yourself, especially I think in the industry I'm in, there can be a lot of gaslighting or invalidating your feelings. And so it's really just like we said before, intuition and like trusting your gut and what you're saying and being able to advocate for yourself, regardless of who it may be trying to shoot you down. That's something I've learned to really stand strong in your position. What was the second half of that question?
Yeah, the second half says, as Asian Americans, does that complicate matters more in your experience?
Not from my view, but from other people's views who may be racist. And sure, like they view me more complicated, but it doesn't impact how I am.
Sure. And another question sent anonymously is, you've talked about forming connections. Do you have any advice in maintaining the connections we've made in college or making new genuine connections post-college?
Yeah, I mean, people will always come and go in your life. And it's really about, again, authenticity. Like, do you really want these people in your life? What are you gaining from those connections? Are those people, will those people really be there for you? You know, are they genuine friends? Just a lot of questions that I'm sure you've all had to ask yourselves before too. Actually, can I flip that question? How do you, you know, how do you figure out who should be in your life?
Whoa, nobody's ever flipped the question. That's really interesting. But yeah, I mean, does anybody want to kind of share? I feel like a lot of us might have like our own experiences with this, and I don't want to, take up the conversation. But does anybody want to, raise of hands? Anybody want to answer that?
No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure.
For sure. Yeah. That's I wasn't sure if wait, Mythica, you weren't raising your hand, were you? Were you raising your hand? No? Okay, super cool. That's all right. But yeah, okay, well that's completely fine. Um oh, okay, super cool. But yeah, if that's okay, we can also just move on. But I can also share in terms of deciding who's kind of, good to keep around.
Go for
Um,
it. Go for it.
yeah, I don't know. I think it's good to kind of just look back on your interactions with this person and just kind of, look at your experiences and feel like, is that something you kind of want to maintain the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? If it's just mostly energy that's kind of hurting you and it's just mostly negative for the most part, I think it's like time to and accept that, your relationship with them might not be the strongest and might not last for that long, and also might benefit you more to be able to move on and make other connections. But yeah, that's kind of a generic answer, but
No, that was beautiful. I agree. I agree with what you said.
thank you. And Kate said, I keep people around who influence me positively, which is great.
Important. Yeah.
All right, well, we have just received a question from Vithika. So Vithika, would you like to unmute yourself and ask? Okay, yeah.
Wait, how do I unmute myself?
Yeah, we're unmuted.
Oh, wait, are we unmuted?
Yes, we are. You can talk.
Sorry. My question was, what were some of your struggles entering the modeling industry? Because it's typically dominated by cisgendered people and Caucasian people. Are we unmuted?
No.
Yeah, I'm just waiting for the captions. It's typically done. Oh, cisgender people. Yeah, okay. Well, I think this goes back to Claudia actually asked me a question about how do I deal with other people who are in older generations, and all of their questions. And it's very similar to that. You just need a lot of patience. And it unfortunately at this time requires a lot of energy because you will receive many questions about who you are. So it was a balance, for sure. I was lucky that when I started out in the modeling industry, it was also unintentional. I was just surrounded by friends who were photographers because that's what they were majoring in school, and they kind of just needed models for their homework assignments. And so I was like, okay, why not? Like, I don't care. And it kind of like snowballed. And so I was lucky that beginning, I was just surrounded by friends, and I was able to become more comfortable with myself and my body in very intimate and communal spaces. And as it began to increase into like more mainstream things, who I knew I was at my core didn't change. And I would just remind myself of that, remind myself that anything that they would say wouldn't knock me off balance because I know myself and there's nothing they can say that would change that, So it's just being grounded in that way and also preserving your energy, figuring out when you need to take a break from spaces where there may be lots of intimate questions or questions you don't necessarily want to answer, and go back to those communal spaces and balance that time, So that's how I would typically navigate it.
All right. Well, thank you, Mythica, for your question. And yeah, we'll just be moving on. Keep up the great questions, everybody. But yes, this is another anonymous question. But what has been the most rewarding project to work on, or what has been your most favorite project?
Oh, that's so impossible. It's like choosing, your favorite flavor of something. There's just so many different flavors. Like I love every single one for a different reason. My most recent favorite is definitely what you actually just showed, the beauty of being deaf, because it was such a healing experience for me to be around deaf people of color, especially because I lacked that for so long in my life, and to be able to create art with them and then also just get together during the pandemic. We were all tested beforehand and it was safe, and to like hug people was also just something simple that was healing. So it impacted me really deeply, and I'll always hold that project again like very close to my heart. So that would be my favorite in this moment.
Great, thank you so much. And then our next question is from our very own co-director, Wally. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Chella. My question is, out of all your projects, what was the medium of expression you felt was most meaningful or impactful for you?
Medium. Again, it really depends, because for right now, also, I'm going to answer it presently because that's all I can answer. But right now, it's actually the book, because there's just so much in the book that's coming out that I would never write in an Instagram caption. It's just not meant to be received that way. But when it's in the medium of like a book that people can physically hold in their hands and sit down with and spend time with digesting, that it's just a completely different experience. So definitely writing right now is a medium that I'm excited to experiment with more.
Great, thank you, Wally. And that actually is perfect because our next asker, Miley, feel free to correct me. Please feel free to ask Chella your question.
Hi, so I am Miley. I know the spelling's a little strange. I just unique. I just wanted to say, first off, very cool that you're here. Thank you for being here. When I saw your name at this event, I was like, whoa, can't believe that actually like it's happening, or he's going to be here. I just wanted to know a little bit more about your book and kind of maybe the audience you're hoping to reach with it, how long that's been in the works. Just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I actually started writing it about 2 years ago, because I felt like there was so much happening in my head and I needed to extract it somehow. So I just started writing, and I also wanted to remember this moment in time from the perspective of myself at 21 years old, which was not always going to be the perspective. So I felt like I needed to do this imminently, and I just have this window. So I went for it, and that's how I started writing the book. In terms of what is in it, it was a long process. I was really trying to figure out, how do I fit in like a short memoir within like 60 pages. That's like so hard to do, because when you look back on your life, when anyone looks back on your life, how do you condense that in a fluid narrative? It's so hard. So I was lucky that I actually have kept a diary my whole life. I don't remember ever not having a diary. So I pulled those out of the closet and I would just spend days reading it, which were very emotional and heavy, because I don't think I had actually done that yet, where I looked back and was that present, and went in chronological order. So I would kind of just pick out the key moments that I saw throughout the diaries as threads and compile them. And then still it was so long, so I had to cut that down to like 10%. And that's kind of what the book is. But it's literally just like such key moments in my life extracted from my diary for the most part, now available to the public. So it's super nerve-wracking but exciting that I feel like everyone's about to read my diary.
Thank you for your question, Miley. Moving on, our next question is also sent anonymously. It often feels like a sort of back and forth movement with AAPI activism, such as our community having one win just to experience another loss. How do you maintain the motivation to keep pursuing activism? In other words, how are you able to keep moving forward?
So there's a term that I learned this past year called sustainable activism, and that's incredible. It essentially tells you to balance self-care and self-love with activism, which is a very hard dichotomy, because oftentimes activism is telling you you're not worthy. and you don't deserve anything that you have. And so you need to balance that with things that tell you you are worthy and you do deserve everything that you have. So it's figuring out how to balance that for yourself. And I can't give you the exact, recipe because everyone's so different, but I would urge you to look up the term sustainable activism because there's a lot of step-by-step ways to figure out how you can do that for yourself.
All right, everybody here has homework. Search up sustainable activism.
Yes.
No, I mean, great little lesson right there. And I think that's such a great thing that people can really apply themselves to and to learn. So yeah, thank you for that. Our next question comes from our own staff, Kalissa. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, Chella. Yeah, I was wondering if you had, sorry, I was wondering if you had any advice for people who may be struggling with their identity, whether it's regarding sexuality, gender, race, or all of the above.
Oh, yes. When I was in this space, I would do lots of research. That's just how I am. When I'm curious about something, I go very deep down into the wormhole. Whether that's like YouTube or Instagram or like, I guess now TikTok is like a thing. But I definitely make sure that I follow like people who are also either going through that or have figured that out for themselves and just sit with what they have to say, or even like read the books that they're putting out, because what they say, what you're going through, so many people are going through, and that's what in the moment I feel like, at least me, I didn't realize. I felt so alone and so isolated, but it's like so many people are going through the same thing, and there's places where people are talking about it. So I just encourage you to find those spaces either online or, I mean, honestly, it seems like your university is pretty rad. So I'm sure you could find like a place in person as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kalissa, for your question. Our next question was asked by another one of our staff, Kate. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hold on, let me just have it right here so I can see it. So we had this discussion about toxic positivity, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, this feeling of I guess being negative or overly positive in a situation. So I was wondering, do you find yourself experiencing this sense of toxic positivity where in a negative situation you'll find yourself being overly positive to sort of dismiss this negativity of the situation? And if so, how do you overcome these experiences and feelings?
Okay, wait. I'm gonna read the transcript. 1 second. Okay, so toxic positivity, from what I understand, is like a coping mechanism people use to get through experiences that are hard to digest. Is that correct?
Yeah, just I guess dismissing the negativity of a situation just to think of the positives. So sort of example of this is your friend gives you popcorn, but you find a hair in it. So you're just thinking, oh, thank you for the popcorn, but there's still a hair in it. So you're just kind of I guess dismissing the negativity, which is the hair and the popcorn, but still being hey, thanks.
Okay. I think if with the popcorn situation, I feel okay, I'm trying to think about this within, did you ask it in terms of activism?
Yeah, definitely. Just, I guess the example in real life would be although we're experiencing hate crimes and stuff, AAPI hate crimes, we're still seeing activism and this rise of support to the community. How can we sort of experience both feelings at the same time without being overly positive of the situation, I guess?
So I feel when I'm digesting something that is very heavy and traumatizing, sometimes your instant reaction can be to mask it in positivity, but then that's diluting the reality of the situation and the repercussions that that may have. So it's definitely a balance, because sometimes for your own mental health and physical health, you need to take a step back. So it really depends. I think there's like two answers. There's what you do publicly with toxic positivity, and then there's what you do yourself. And if you need to, in that moment, just mask it and be positive because you can't digest that situation at that moment in time for whatever reason, then that's completely valid, because you do not have to like traumatize yourself if you are not in a place to add that. But if you were to start talking about that publicly, my initial reaction would be that I'd worry that would dilute the situation and erase the feelings of others who may be sitting with that situation and allowing themselves to feel that trauma and emote from that. So I think it really depends on the situation. There's not going to be one answer for that. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kate, for your question. I think okay. Sorry. Eliza just came up with a question. So Eliza, feel free to ask Chella your question.
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a question. How were you able to find like unity between all of your different identities within yourself? I feel like often sometimes if you do identify with a lot of different groups, like they may be like contrasting within you, and it's hard to find like the balance to find like your true self.
Yeah, I totally feel you. This is why I think that I made peace with being my own representation, and I no longer am trying to find it in this one place. And I remind myself that like me existing as I am is enough. And that was really hard for me to digest at first, because I feel like our culture and our society is wired to receive validation externally, but it can be so powerful to rewire that to validate yourself internally, which is what I have continuously been doing, but it's a practice. So definitely that, just like catching when you are trying to find that external connection. And if you need it, like finding it in different places works for me. But also just like sitting with yourself and letting that be enough.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for your question, Eliza. Our next question comes from Laura, I believe. Feel free to ask your question.
Yeah. Hi, Chella. Everyone.
Whoa, you really got like the background going on.
I share a room with someone else, so I always have a background. Yeah, my question for you is about accessible design. I'm a fellow artist as well as a designer. I work in the advertising field, and so I do a lot of design work there. And ever since learning about what accessible design is, I've really made it a cornerstone element to include in every single piece I make. But sometimes I find I'm the only person in the room advocating for inclusive design. Do you have any advice for normalizing accessible design in the workplace, or just tips on how to be inclusive to people with all different kinds of disabilities?
Yes. I mean, first of all, thank you, because I know it takes a lot of energy and it can be very tiring. And I appreciate you doing that work, because I hope that the people around you can listen and learn something from you. And so first and foremost, I would say just keep doing what you're doing, honestly. And for the second part of the question, I don't know what kinds of design specifically you're doing, but of course is like, you know, as long as you can caption your videos, that's incredible. Adding image descriptions help people who are blind or people who have low vision. And then there's honestly, like, I was just building my website, and there's so many different ways to implement accessibility widgets. And I'm learning, like, there's certain fonts that make it easier for dyslexic individuals to read, or certain like contrasts that some people need to be able to like digest the information better and not become overwhelmed by what they're seeing on screen. So maybe like looking into the accessibility widgets or codes that you could implement into your designs.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Can I just ask what program or website you're using to build your website?
Wait, say that again?
Yeah. What can I just ask what website or program you're using to build? Yeah.
So for a long time, I was using Squarespace, but then I changed to, I heard a lot of good things about Cargo Collective. So that's what I'm using now.
Sick. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura, for your question. Our next question comes from Vithika again, so feel free to ask your question.
You talk a lot about like when you're answering your questions, you talk about like finding like peace internally and like grounding yourself. And I was wondering like if you struggle like day by day, kind of like feeling stable in your identity, and if so, like what are the ways you like ground yourself and like find that peace internally? I don't know.
No, that makes sense. You're good. I think that, yeah, it's a continuous practice. And there's days that, not so much with my identity, I feel very set at this point in who I am. But there are definitely ways I ground myself just across the board. And it's really slowing down. My girlfriend is incredible with that. She's just different in the ways that she like is always very present and like calm. And I think that's a good balance for me because I'm very like go. So being with her has taught me a lot about that. And it's also, you know, kind of coming up with statements to say to yourself at different times. Like, for example, one thing I say is like, just because you're handling something well doesn't mean other people will react to it well. Or, you know, simple things like you are worthy, because it sounds really cheesy, but at its core, like so much of us struggle with our self-worth. And it's not really that cheesy to be able to say that to yourself and believe it. It's actually really amazing. So just saying things like that and like taking the time to step back and like sit with myself and just noticing what I'm feeling. Most people don't do that. And I read this thing recently, like most people in the shower aren't actually in the shower. And I've been thinking about that for so long. I'm like, that's so true. We're all somewhere else. Like, and so I just try to really connect and ground myself with my senses. It's a continuous practice. It can be really hard sometimes, but there's a lot of ways you can do it.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for your questions. Yes, moving on. I believe, you know, following your work and your social media, occasionally you talk about bouts of body dysmorphia. And this is a personal question, but I guess like when you do kind of experience that, like body dysmorphia, how do you kind of get a mental grasp of like what you're feeling and like how do you kind of, I guess, process that and kind of move on from it?
So 2 things. The first thing is noticing first and foremost when I'm thinking that, because for so long I'd feel kind of like pangs of anxiety and I'd be like, oh, what's that? You know, but then now that I've been practicing being more present, I'm very aware like why those emotions come up. And sometimes it has to do with gender dysphoria or body dysmorphia. And so I catch that thought and I kind of sit with it and then reframe it. So for example, if it's about like a part of my body, I try to be gentle with myself. I'm not like, oh, you shouldn't think that. Like, no, okay, I notice you're thinking that. And this is like your body has carried you through so much. Like regardless of what your body looks like, it's incredible. Like we are so lucky to have a body that can adapt so well and carry us through life. Like it just really starts with gratitude, honestly, first and foremost, and just reframing it to be more gentle and sweet towards yourself. Like as if if your best friend thought that, like, what would you wouldn't want them to think that. Like, what would you say to them? And like catching your thoughts and changing them that way. And it's also like letting yourself feel that. We're really, I feel like as a society, we're taught to repress emotions that we don't like to feel, when in reality, you need to sit with them or else they build up and will explode someday. So like, if you feel anxious or like overwhelmed, don't shove it into a little bottle and toss it out the window. Like, let yourself feel that and be gentle with yourself as you're riding them out. And over time, you won't be so fearful. And it also just like won't take so much energy away from your life, because you're not using all that energy to repress. You're letting yourself actually emote.
Yeah, and to follow up with that, I feel like, the mindfulness you're practicing is like very full of awareness. And I guess like mental health is such a big part of that. And mental health is such like a big topic now. Like, how do you kind of feel about mental health? Like, what's your stance on it? And also, I guess I like lost my second question.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, no, it happens.
It does
yeah,
happen.
I guess my first question, yeah, like what's your stance with mental health currently?
My stance is that it's so important. Like, it affects literally everything we do, and we are our brains. I just feel like we all are these brains. Like, how could you not take care of your mental health? It impacts everything you will do.
Yeah, and I just remembered the other question I was thinking of.
Great.
Yeah, you mentioning it's like spending your time and like a lot of people spending their energy into kind of repressing their emotions. I feel like a lot of us can relate to that growing up with an Asian Pacific American background and kind of just being taught that. How do we start to unlearn that and start to move forward from repressing that?
It's noticing first and foremost when you are repressing, which is much easier said than done. Very, very hard. But once you are able to notice it, then you're able to catch it. And I mean, this has been a work in progress. Honestly, I feel like during the pandemic, my main focus has been to watch my thoughts. And about 2 years ago, if someone said that to me, I'd have no idea what they meant. I'd be like, where? Like, you thinking, where do I look? Like, what do you mean? But now I understand, and I'm able to notice exactly what I'm thinking and change, what I'm thinking. So it definitely starts there, and it's not something that's gonna happen. It takes so much time. It may take years, depends on the person, but overall, again, just like being really gentle with yourself and not rushing the process, and letting your own pace ride it out.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And then I have an anonymous question, kind of asking that at a point in your career, and maybe that's still constant now, your whole, I guess, thing was like, spreading love and like having love for all people. And given that there's a lot of people nowadays that don't share your views or just have very different personalities and different, perspectives, how do you, I guess, still learn to love all people despite your differences and I guess like disagreements and things like that?
Wow, well, I'm honored, first of all, that they would describe that as my thing. That's really cool. I think I lead with compassion, and I think growing up where I did, I always sum it up by saying right before the election, Trump came to speak at my high school. So there was just like, it's very conservative to say the least. And growing up there for 18 years of my life was really hard. And I had to deal with a lot of people that I would not agree with. But they were still good people, and I was able to see why they thought the things that they did. And it wasn't like they were malicious in their heart. They weren't. They were just receiving a lot of media and miscommunications about what was true, and what was real. And remembering that and leading with that compassion just allows me to see people as more dynamic than evil or good.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really important to remember, is that people aren't like inherently bad or just like, you know, disagreement or unjust, you know, it's just like a taught thing, and it's not necessarily a bad thing as well. It's just something that people have to come together to understand and come to an agreement with. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Another question kind of mentions speaking back on love. They're curious about your relationship with your girlfriend currently. I guess I feel like in your YouTube and things like that, we've been able to have glimpses of your girlfriend. Like we'd love to hear about kind of her impact on your life and, you know, how you're doing now, you know, what's going on.
It's great. I'm at her grandma's house right now. And we're gonna have dinner after this. But yeah, her impact, I don't know, it's been incredible. Like she is just, I don't even know where to begin. Like she's just amazing, and has made me feel safe, you know, for the first time in my life. Like she was one of the first people who learned sign language for me when no one around me ever has done that before. And like noticed when I was being left out of conversations and reacted with an open mind. Like when I told her I wanted top surgery, just like, I don't know, it's been amazing. Like knowing her has taught me so much. And yeah.
That sounds like such a healthy and wholesome relationship.
Yeah.
I saw some people shed some tears here.
Shedding some tears. Oh my gosh. No, I hope they're tears of like happiness.
Yeah, most definitely. And I mean, you know, leading by example, I think a lot of people strive for that. And that's such an amazing thing that you have with your partner. That's so beautiful. Yeah. Going from there, you know, you talking about top surgery, someone also asked this somewhere up there. But I guess like what kind of pushed you to like go into that decision? And for someone who is curious about going through gender transformation surgery and like such like that, like how do you, I guess, take the next step into that, especially if they have a family who maybe doesn't agree with it as well, or just surrounded by people who don't agree with that?
Oh, so okay. In terms of when did I know, I've always known. And I just knew that I wouldn't connect with my chest once puberty hit, and didn't know the language to articulate like that. The process was very long, actually. Honestly, a lot shorter than most people. There's some people who wait years, but I was privileged enough to like be able to get it done in a year, which was still very hard. And there were a lot of rough times that I felt so clouded with dysphoria. But the first step is research. When I realized the words top surgery, this is when labels are good. I was then able to use those words to find the community that was behind those words. And I just fell into a wormhole where I like wouldn't even sleep anymore. I would just stay up researching so much and like watching other people go through it and feeling like such a deep desire of wanting that as well. So it's definitely began with research, which is what I would urge anyone to do, because there are so many different stories about it and everyone has their own experiences. The process for me is you actually have to get a letter from a licensed therapist diagnosing you with gender dysphoria, which I think is fucked up on so many levels, because it's essentially saying you are not able to just walk in and say for yourself that you have that. You need a licensed therapist who doesn't even really know you that well to give you an official medical letter. It's just like dumb. But so I had to do that, and then had to find the surgeon, and you really have to find someone you feel comfortable with, that is good. So definitely like talk to them a lot, look at their past surgeries, ask for maybe like the sound or the emails of like other people who have gone through the process with them. And then yeah, I mean, it's very different. Like there's insurance involved, but overall, like the whole process for me was so worth it because I don't know, like still to this day, like just seeing my shirt fall the way it is gives me so much joy that I will never take for granted in the same way cis people may take their bodies for granted sometimes.
Great, thank you so much. I'm sure a lot of people are kind of curious about the options that they have and the resources that they have to feel more comfortable in their body and in their identity. So I think it's really important that we kind of touch upon that. That's really great. Sean, who's cutting all these onions for real? But yes, yeah, moving on to our next question. Earlier you mentioned, and I saw some reactions from our audience that Trump spoke at your high school before. And, you know, going on with all of this current pandemic stuff and also the rise in anti-AAPI violence and hate, I guess, like, what are your thoughts on that? And like, how can we all kind of take in all of this really scary information and still be able to cope and, I guess, like, take action against all of that?
Yeah, you know, it has to do with sustainable activism, which is a different answer to everyone. Like, how can you take care of yourself? Take care of yourself, and implementing that. If you don't feel like you have the energy right now to like stand up, go in the streets, or even like write an Instagram post, that's okay because it's not your job. But also, if you do feel like you want to do that, by all means, you know, like there are so many resources out there, like all over, at least all over my timeline to do so. And it's just, you know, like really listening to your body and listening to your mind. How much can you take on right now? And always remembering to, despite all of the trauma you may or may not be taking in, like how can you put your mental and physical health first? Because that's always number one. Because if you're not okay, you can't help other people.
Most definitely. And I guess like for you and your sustainable activism, like how are you kind of coping and also taking action against all of this violence that's currently happening in our world?
It's boundaries. Boundaries for sure. Like I set new ones and I take others down every single day. It's always changing, but just having those conversations with myself, and then also like being in spaces that I feel safe, being in spaces where I'm around other Asian people who get it, that I don't need to like articulate, this is why I feel upset right now. No, like just like, so you can go in the space and be, and no one has to talk. You can just be on the same page. Spaces like that are so important. So checking in with yourself, going to safe spaces, really finding those people that are truly your community, all of those things.
Great, thank you so much. And we have another question from Jaren. Jaren, feel free to ask your question.
Hi, Chella. My question is, how do you educate / deal with people that don't understand or don't like even try to understand like what you're going through?
It depends. Is this person going to be in your life for a long time? Are they worth your time? Do you have the energy at that moment to explain? Do you want to explain? Will they actually take what you're saying into consideration? Like, will this be a productive conversation, or will you just be wasting a lot of energy? All these are really important questions you can ask yourself before engaging with someone who may want to debate.
Great. Thank you, Jaren, for asking that question. Yeah, I think that is our final question. We're gonna, put that to a close. Thank you, everybody, for all of those lovely questions. Yeah, it was so great to hear Chella's, give us so many lessons and so much advice and wisdom. So thank you so much for that.
Of course, I'm so happy to be here. It's nice to feel like I'm actually hanging out with people like during a pandemic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're all very happy to be seeing each other as well. And I'm so happy to see old and new friends and faces. But yeah, we know that over on the East Coast, it's pretty late for you. So we will try to conclude this pretty quickly. But like you mentioned earlier, you just released a new book. We kind of want to give you the space to share about where people can get this book, what's it about, everything like that.
Yeah, so the book is called Continuum, and you probably know like my concept of that by now because I've mentioned it a few times, but it's basically like this ideology that everything's on a continuum and to fuck binaries because they don't exist. And it's, you know, essentially like kind of reading my diary, like I mentioned before, lots of checkpoints in my life, a lot of things that I have not shared on social media because it just was not the place to share. So it's releasing June 1st, which is in like, I don't know, like 4 days, very soon. And you can order it from my website, which is my name.com. And then you can click shop and very self-explanatory. It'll take you to buy the book.
Yes, thank you so much. Everybody, you heard the word. Mark your calendars for June 1st. But yeah, I think that's such a great thing that you know, worked on and that you're willing to share because like you mentioned, you know, having such personal things now out there for people to kind of look at and learn from. That's such an amazing thing. And we're so glad that you're able to release that. But yeah, other than that, you know, where can people, I guess, find you on social media? How can we support your work? And any concluding thoughts like that?
Oh man, you can find me a lot of things are just under my name. So if you type my name in on any social media, I'll probably pop up. It'd be kind of, yeah. But actually I do have a question because in the intermission, I told Mary V I could ask you guys a question. And this is a question from her to you, which is if you have an Asian grandma or an Asian grandparents, what is the best dish that they make?
That is a great question. Please let her know that is a great question.
Okay, I did. I was like, I'm gonna ask them. I'll ask them. Tomato and egg.
Tomato and egg. That's a good one.
Grandma's fucking sounds so good. I always think about like if all of our grandmas just collectively made like a restaurant, that would be the best restaurant ever.
Honestly, yeah.
Or
oh my god, these are all such great suggestions.
it sounds so good. If any of you have ever had like homemade char siu bao, like so good.
I agree. I completely
So
agree.
good.
Oh my gosh. Well, you might want to start making a menu because these also come from different ethnic grandmothers as well.
That's
So
so
you know
true.
that these are going to be spicy and cool. No, yeah, these are all super great. Oh my god, I'm going to have to put these on a menu as well. But yeah, no, that's such a great question.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And with that note, I'm hungry. So but it was nice to meet you all.
Yes. Well, thank you again, Chella, for all your time. Yes, please go have dinner. Everybody else also get ready to have dinner as well. Just settle in. And happy APAM, everybody. It's closing, but you know, it's always a great time to find community, find solidarity, and find love. So thank you, Chella, and thank you everybody for coming. Feel free to hang out if you'd like to keep talking. But yeah, have a good night.
Awesome. Thank you all so much for having me, and thank you for such wonderful questions. It was really awesome.
For sure. All right. Good night.
Bye, everyone.